The Space Force is official, and I gotta admit, is actually really, really cool. For some reason, there are a lot of people ragging on Trump for wanting a Space Force, and I gotta admit, this is the coolest thing Trump has ever done. And I've been very critical of the guy in terms of foreign policy and military and stuff like that, right? And again, I know, nuance. Everybody's gonna freak out. No, I give him credit where it's credit's due, but I think he's following a long line of stupid foreign policy. He's a little bit better in some ways than Obama was, but come on, man. Tomahawk missiles, Yemen raids, commando raids, drone strike. I could go on a million years. I don't want to, though. Because at this point, I want to say something cool. The Space Force, I imagine in the future, is going to be so dramatically different, but it's awesome that we're now entering what was once considered just to be like a sci-fi future, not real, not a real thing. We have all these shows, you have Starfleet and Star Trek, and you have these sci-fi movies where there's like a fleet in outer space. This is the beginning of that, okay? So you might not like the Orange Man, that's fine, but think about what this means after the Orange Man is gone and how we can improve this and actually start colonizing the stars. This is where it begins. Massive investment into space infrastructure. Could you imagine a child today, okay, somebody who's like 6 or 7 years old, and they're asked what they want to be when they grow up. And they say, I want to serve in the Space Force, and I want to be a rocket plane pilot. We have people say, I want to be a fighter pilot when I grow up. I want to get my wings. What about your propulsion jets? Where can this go? This is cool stuff. Let's read the story. And here's what that means from the Air Force Times. Air Force officials on Friday told reporters that people are clamoring for information on how to join the military's latest branch. The short answer is, they're going to have to wait a while. President Trump officially signed the Space Force into law on Friday. But now, all that means is everyone at Air Force Space Command will now be assigned to Space Force. Over the next 18 months, officials said, finer details of manning and training the new branch will be hammered out and set in motion. Quote, it's going to be really important that we get this right. A uniform, a patch, a song. It gets to the culture of a service, said Air Force General Jay Raymond, the head of Air Force Space Command and U.S. Space Command, who will lead Space Force until a chief of space operations is confirmed by the Senate. There's a lot of work going on toward that end. It's going to take a long time to get that point, but that's not something we're going to roll out on day one. I'm very critical of a lot of things America does in terms of foreign policy. I have no opinion in terms of what America is doing in terms of space policy, because we don't really have that. Intergalactic, interstellar, solar policy. What would you describe it, right? Are we going to get to a point? Okay, we got to do this, right? Think about, 15, 20 years from now. We're going to be like, President Johnson, okay, I think his space policy is nuts. The thing he's proposing with the moon base and Mars launching is a waste of money. Or think about this in 20 years. President Johnson, he wants to build a border barrier on the moon to separate the U.S. colonies from the China colonies, and I think it's a mistake. I know you might have issues with the idea of a wall. I just think it'd be a cool conversation to have. I'm looking towards the future. And I think right now there's going to be a lot of young people, a lot of kids, who are seeing that sci-fi dream, that Star Trek future. I know it's very different, but this is the real life version of it. Some people have criticized it, saying, the Air Force already did this. There's a big difference between the Air Force and the Space Force. And I get it. They could argue, the Air Force could eventually become the Space Force because just about, up. But I'm thinking about 50 to 100 years from now, right? What technology will bring us? Will we eventually discover some kind of propulsion technology that doesn't require hard fuel, like massive fuels? Like, look at this shit, To get into space requires a lot of energy. Will we eventually get some kind of low energy alternative, maybe some kind of anti-grav technology or something? And if that's the case, we might actually have territories in outer space. The Air Force is not going to deal with that. You could argue the Space Force gets, technologically advanced enough to the point where if we have ships that can float around like the UFOs do, then they could essentially be our Air Force anyway. So fine, maybe in the future it'll become obsolete, or they'll just adopt similar technologies. And I'll tell you this, the Army has boats, right? People might be like, but I thought the Navy, no, I think the Army has more boats than the Navy. But the Navy has the big, crazy boats. That's my understanding. So okay, so this is fun, right? But we're going to have a little bit more fun, because I'm not going to sit here and just tell you about the Space Force. I want to dive into the mysteries in this world and the reason why some conspiracists may think the Space Force was really being formed and what's really going on behind the scenes. Now, let me stop here. This is serious. The Space Force is cool. I'm excited to see what this becomes. So far, so good. Okay? You don't gotta like the president to recognize Space Force is cool. I don't know why people are getting all angry. They hate Trump so much. We got like a Space Force, dude. That's awesome. But now let's have some fun. And I want to preface this by saying I am not here to push stupid conspiracies or anything. I'm just here to have a little fun with these UFO stories. You see, over the past year or two, there have been an expansion of stories about UFOs, credible ones. And I've talked about them because I love talking about things that are kind of unknown. I might launch it. We're preparing a different podcast to take all of these stories that we can't solve. You know, basically the point of news is to be like, here's what we know. These stories are to be like, here's what we don't know, right? Quote, it did not obey the laws of physics. Pilot who spotted famous Tic Tac UFO breaks silence after 15 years. It was going from like 50,000 feet to 100 feet in like seconds, which is not possible. You see, this story is new. This story just came out. Some people believe that over the past few years, the reason we've seen credible stories about UFOs is that aliens are real. Yes, and that the governments of the world need to get us warmed up to the idea. All of a sudden, at the same time, a space force emerges. So we can play silly games and act like, you know, the aliens are really here. No, I'll walk all that back. But I will say, there is something interesting that should be mentioned, that we have an uptick in all of these credible stories about UFOs. Navy pilots going back years saying this is real, and then all of a sudden, a space force being signed into law. Is it possible that in reality, it's not about aliens. It's about the fact that the U.S. government is recognizing finally, and they are, that there is something happening in space and in the atmosphere we can't understand. And we're going to need to investigate, and we're going to need to invest and investigate what's going on. We're going to need to invest in a space force that can actually deal with this in a much better way. If it's, you know, I think the fairest assessment, if we're going to combine the stories, is that for the past several decades, we've learned that there have been credible sightings from servicemen saying, we see weird things, these Tic Tacs that don't obey the laws of physics. Now you've got Trump saying, perhaps we should have a space force, because for whatever this is, we don't know. We should be exploring this area. You see, the Air Force was always about the air, not above it. Maybe there's something that needs to be looked at. So this is a story about a U.S. fighter pilot whose plane filmed the famous and still unexplained Tic Tac UFO footage, and he has spoken for the first time about his close encounter. Chad Underwood broke 15 years of silence on the subject, describing the object he recorded over the Pacific Ocean as not behaving within the normal laws of physics. He said it was going from like 50,000 feet to 100 feet in seconds, which is not possible. No, I'm sorry. It is possible. We just don't know how to do it yet. You know, there are some people that argue that anything is possible. It's just a matter of figuring it out. So perhaps we're looking at technology we don't understand. Perhaps it's as simple as saying that Russia developed a technology we don't know about. Or it's American technology from an undisclosed branch of government we don't know about. Perhaps. This is actually part of a black operations space force, and this technology will now be rolled out to the public over time. So there's a few conspiracies we can entertain, right? Is it possible that the U.S. government is scared at whatever these things are and wants to launch a space force? Is it possible that these are actually made by the United States in secret, and now because we want to start using them to show our military might, we need to explain how they actually, you know, how they could come to exist? Perhaps now at the Space Force, in the next few years, they're going to be like, look at this thing we built, even though we've already had the technology for a long time. I don't know. I just like the idea. I think it's fun. I'm not telling you it's true. I know all the stupid leftists are going to be like, Tim pushes UFO conspiracies all the time. Oh, calm down. Okay, this story is real. It's from the independent left-wing site. I think it's just fun to talk about. The Tic Tac, so called because of its rounded shape and white color, was caught on video as the U.S. Navy attempted to identify a series of objects spotted on radar flying off America's west coast in November 2004. The authenticity of the film, which was first made public in 2017, was finally confirmed by the Pentagon earlier this year. Officials said they still have no idea what the recorded object was. Weather phenomenon, man-made craft, and birds have all been ruled out. So I'll put it this way. Imagine you're Donald Trump. You watch Fox News all the time. You're not the most sophisticated person on the planet, and you hear news about UFOs. And then he probably turns to Pence and the other people and says, what are these things? Do we know what this is? And they said, we don't. One of the funniest jokes, I think this was on Joe Rogan, they said, if aliens were real, Donald Trump, you think he could keep his mouth shut about this stuff? No. I think this is what we're seeing. I think this is it. Let me tell you. If aliens existed and the US knew about it. Yet Trump would be like, we got aliens, and he'd just blurt it out, and he'd talk all about it. He's not, though, which says to me, probably not the case. And I think, he said something to the fact of like, they did release a bunch of UFO documents, and he said it wasn't. But I'll tell you this. Here's what I imagine. These stories get prominent just because they're interesting, not because it's new or whatever, but, the Pentagon recognizes it. And there's Trump sitting down, and he sees on the news, they say something about UFOs, and he looks over and says, do we know what these things are? And they say, Mr. President, we don't. We don't know what this was. And then he probably says something like, shouldn't we? And they're like, we probably should. And he goes, well, what are we doing? How do we deal with this stuff? And they're like, the Air Force typically deals with it. And then Trump probably said, what about space? What if you're UFOs? Let's do a space force. And they went, oh, yeah. So I do think it's connected, right? But I don't know what these objects are. I'm not going to speculate and play games. I just think it's fun. I think it's cool that we finally have a space force. I think it's cool that, finally there's something that I think young people can aspire to as kind of a common vision. When the United States went to the moon, this was like an American thing. Everybody was like, we're going to do it. What are Americans unified by today? Nothing really. I mean, people even hate the Space Force, which is dumb. It is an expensive, package. So I can criticize the expense for sure. But you know what? If we're going to spend money on anything related to the military, wait, let me stop. My biggest problem with taxes is not taxes. It's the taxes that go to war. I'll tell you what. If you take my tax money and you build spaceships, space colonies, and moon colonies and stuff, can I give you more money to do it? Like, I would gladly pay more for people to go and do these things. I'd love to see a human colony on Mars and the moon, and there's talk about it. Trump talked about it. Yes, please, more of this. This is the stuff I will absolutely praise. Promising me more of this, all right? Anyway, I'll leave it there. Stick around. Next video will be tomorrow at 10 a.m. Podcast every day at 6:30 p.m., and I will see you all then.